detect unknown content from recommended enable content from for this.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody. We obviously have a few folks still trying to figure out how to get here from the hotel, but in order for us to finish our business and get on our ways back home and back to our families and our businesses and everything we need to be doing while we're at home, we're going to go ahead and start this morning. And I know the others will be getting here shortly. Because just about everybody around the table I've seen this morning somewhere, but not here. So anyway, this morning we're going to dive into one of the first of our topics of things that we're going to look at in depth as this council travels around the state. But I first want to say happy birthday to Dominic Maricchia. Today is his birthday. 29 years young, with a few anniversaries on top of that. Older than rural Georgia. He was there when they invented baseball. But anyway, thank you all for being here this morning and being ready to go. And our first presenter today is Eric McRae. Eric, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
And I understand you are the expert on broadband.
You have been lied to, sir.
Ain't the first time. But I think Eric's going to kind of give us a current look of what broadband looks like in Georgia. And that way we'll know a little bit more about what we're talking about as we go through the day. So, Eric, thank you for being with us.
No
and
problem.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. As introduced, I am Eric McRae. I'm an associate director with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, and I direct a unit called Information Technology Outreach Services, otherwise known as ITOS. And so we're basically the nerd herd up at the university when it comes to information technology, and especially with integrating information technology with government. And so I'm going to be talking today a little bit about rural broadband survey we've been doing here in the state, and just kind of laying some groundwork so everybody understands when they hear certain things, they understand what they're being told. So, start off by talking a little bit about the the broadband center. It's not the rural broadband center; it's just the broadband center. The broadband center, which is housed within ITOS, was started during the days of the stimulus, where we had a major federal initiative to map broadband nationwide. And each state would then have information collected, and then that information was then stored or disseminated out to the public, either through vendors or through basically broadband centers that was established at the University of Georgia. We teamed up with Georgia Technology Authority because we wanted to make sure that this center lived beyond just the funding that was coming down from the stimulus dollars, and we want to make sure that that was available long term. So we have the Georgia Broadband Center, and there's information available through there, and it's available if you go to this address here, digitalgeorgia.gov/map. And there we have all the broadband data through a clearinghouse. There's a mapping application. As soon as you hit it, which shows you where is all the where is all the coverage in the state, whether it's DSL, fiber, wireline, fixed wireless, you name it, all the different technologies, all the different speeds, that's available there. We also have advanced maps where you can go in and really start to dig down and say, well, I want to see where all the businesses that don't have access to broadband, where are they at? What's the difference between, 25 down and 10 down? What difference does that make? How does that show up? And so we have all that information available there. We also have static maps that are basically things you can just print off, show things like the Connect America funding, where that was at, and how that is applied across the state. And like I said, it is all freely available, and it's open to the public. So this information And where all this information came from is extremely important because it kind of frames the discussions that we're still having today when it comes to broadband. And I want to go over, there are two different flavors, if you will, of broadband, national broadband mapping data. The first flavor, as we'll call it, is the NTIA, and that is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. This is the first folks that had built the broadband map, and it's very important as to how the information was collected. And we need to keep in mind that the way this information is collected was how it was basically asked by the providers from the feds. So it's not a situation where the providers decided this is how we're going to basically push information up. This is how the federal government asked for the information to be pushed to them. And so the very first thing is in the NTIA map was if a census block was less than 2 square miles and a provider provided broadband and they had broadband to at least one customer in that census block, they got to claim that census block. Now you may have 1,000 people there, but as long as they provide to one, they can claim that. If the census block was greater than 2 square miles, then they reported that information based upon road segment. So they would actually have to provide the network from which they are providing that information out there, providing broadband. And so here's an example, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see here these are census blocks that are greater than 2 square miles. And so we have basically these road networks that show where we have access to broadband. And then for those that are smaller than 2 square miles in an aggregate, we claim the entire census block. So the data collection was done through state offices and then fed up to NTIA. And so the state office that collected that information was the Georgia Technology Authority. They did this in conjunction with Sanborn Mapping. And then they took all that information that was collected, they handed it off to us at the University of Georgia, and we basically produced these map series and these mapping products that allowed access to that information to everyone. The state program broadband initiative ended in June of 2014. That is when the last collection was done that was submitted up to NTIA. At that point in time, the FCC stepped in and the information was flowed to them instead of NTIA. And that was done through what was known as the Form 477 data program. Now, the deal with the Form 477 was it was anybody who was providing information that streamed in one direction of 200 kilobytes or greater had to use this Form 477. So lots of people were now providing information up to FCC as to where they were, what information that they were streaming. But there were some issues with it, and so we'll talk about that. So, they sought funding in FY 2016 to continue the program, but that funding was not granted. And so the mapping program in itself ended in FY 2016. They still collect the data, they're just not mapping that information anymore. And so now you have a situation where you have the NTIA data that's mapped, and you have the FCC data, which is basically just being collected. They are still doing that, the semi-annual collection, every 6 months. They collect that information, they make that available, but there are a couple caveats to what they now collect in that information. First off, if a fixed provider, so they provide that file, if they provide internet or may provide internet, and they do it all at the census block level. So that's a very important distinction I think we need to make sure we understand. Now there's not a requirement that broadband is actually provided in order for the census block to be counted as being covered. And so you may have a situation where no broadband is available, yet it is counted. And that's probably because there are plans to deploy at some point in time. It's expected, but at this point in time, it's not available. And it clearly states on the FCC's webpage that a provider reports that deployment of a particular technology, and I'm going to read this because it's important, technology and bandwidth in a census block may not necessarily offer that service everywhere in the block. Accordingly, a list of providers deployed in a census block does not necessarily reflect the number of choices available to any particular household or business location in that block. And the number of such providers in the census block does not purport to measure competition. Now, when we came to the point where we started looking at the FCC data versus the NTIA data, we at the University of Georgia decided to continue to use the NTIA data, the last submission in 2014, because it was more granular. It was a little bit more exacting. It's still very coarse in the sense that it may just be one person in a census block or one person on a road, but at least it has a little more accuracy. And so all of our information that when we run numbers and do things, we always use the NTIA data for that. So, one question always gets asked, are the maps overstated? Yes, in both instances. There's just no getting around that, and I think that, and they're both overstated, and I don't think either one of them's necessarily far superior to the other. You won't have exactness until you actually start talking with the providers, and the providers can provide you that more exact information. But it's good information, especially from a planning standpoint. I mean, we can really start to look at trends, start to see some information. But under NTIA, providers were required to offer at least one customer, and data was reported on a varying such geography. Under FCCC, the providers listed census blocks where they can do offer services or may offer services, and it's only reported at census block level. So we need to make sure that we understand that when folks say, well, it's on the FCC, they say we got it. All the FCC map says is that they may have it. It does not necessarily guarantee it. And so I want to make sure folks understand that, because when we first started the Joint Broadband Study Committee last year, there was lots of people going around, 97% of the states covered. That's not accurate. And we know that's not accurate. If it was accurate, we wouldn't all be in here concerned about that. And so then you get into the question, what is broadband? Because there's the other big, thing. Everyone starts talking about, well, I don't have broadband in my house. What is broadband? And there's different definitions, if you will. Years ago, when we did this, it was 3 megs down. And so everybody looked at who has access to 3 megs. And so when we looked at this, using the NTIA data with 3 megs, we have about 6% of the total population in the state of Georgia still has unserved households. If you jump up to 10 megs, you can start to see large swaths of the state don't have access to 10 megs of download. When you get to 25 megs, which is what they, at one point, were going to define as broadband, 25 megs down, I believe 3 megs up, we jump up to 16% of the state doesn't have access to it. And keep in mind, that doesn't have access to it, and we still have the overstatement when it comes to census blocks and other things. And so there's large swaths of the state, and when you look at this, they're very large swaths, basically, through this portion of central Georgia right here, southwestern Georgia, that have no access to broadband. Now, the current definition where most people go with broadband is somewhere in the middle. It's just 10 megs down, probably 1 meg up, thereabouts. And I think most people in rural Georgia, if they had 10 megs down, would be thrilled to death. And so that's where a lot of things that we define it as, and we try to use this kind of this standard here. But so it's important that we understand when people talk about the maps, what those maps represent, what's covered, and then it's also important, and when people say, I don't have broadband, we find out what do they consider broadband. Is it 3, 10, or 25 down? It all makes a big difference. That's not to say that our private sector folks that are basically supplying broadband are not doing an amazing job in this state. They are. And they continue to do an amazing job in the state, because the thing is we're not going to get there without them. I can tell you that much. There's 200 plus facility-based broadband providers in the state of Georgia. There are billions of dollars invested annually in the state of Georgia. It's kind of, when you think about the amount of infrastructure that they pour into the state every year to keep broadband going, they are a massive contributor to our economy. There are tens of thousands of employees that support broadband infrastructure. And we have to keep in mind, investment priorities are going to follow demand and revenue. And where does that's going to be? Basically, business and residential demand is in the metropolitan and urban areas. That's where the bulk of their revenue can come from, and they'll build out from there. And the other thing we need to keep in mind is wireless is going to be a key driver. In the past, we've always felt that we had to have a line run to our house in order to have broadband. That's not necessarily the truth anymore. It may be a wireless connection of some sort. There are all sorts of new technologies that are coming out that allow that information to get to our house, where we're not having to do it, where we're having to have someone who digs in the ground and basically provides us access. As I was telling someone earlier today, when it comes to building out the broadband infrastructure, I live in rural Georgia, and I live out in the boondocks, and I'm lucky. I have my provider does a great job. I have great access to broadband. I live off a dirt road. They haven't paved the road yet. I don't have county water. I have a well. Yet lots of folks expect that they should have broadband and advanced technologies before they have the simple things like water and paved roads. And so it's one of those things that it's a challenge for them as they build out into the state. So there were lots of folks complaining all over the state about not having access, not this, that, and everything else. And so we were approached by the Joint House and Senate Committee on Broadband, which Representative Parsons chaired on the House side, to basically do a survey to kind of get the reaction from the state of Georgia and get some information, get some more detailed information about what was the sentiment in Georgia, especially in rural Georgia, with respect to broadband. And so I'm going to share some of those results with you now. So, as of May 15th, we'd had 12,106 respondents. You can see where the respondents were at. They're kind of a little bit spread out all over Georgia. And obviously, we have a lot of folks that aren't responding in this area. One of the challenges, and you can shoot arrows at me if you want, it was an online survey. I mean, there was very little money provided for said survey. So people said, why don't you send out letters to everybody? I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Why don't you call everybody? Yeah, I don't think so. It was an online survey. And the thing is folks may not have access to broadband at home. More than likely they have it at work. They have it on their phone. They have it at the Chick-fil-A. They have it at the Hardee's, the McDonald's. 9 times out of 10, they can go down to the public library. There's access to broadband. They can report it, and that's one of the things that is, that's all on me right there, man. We doing an online survey for people that don't have broadbands, whatever. But 61% of the people who responded claimed they were not able to purchase the broadband speed needed. And so that's a pretty staggering number. And 16% responded, I can't get wireline service at all. And so they were doing it through their phone or through some other type of connection. As a whole, we actually had it where 11,795 times people that got on were presented with broadband providers. So they would put in their address. We would then use the 2014 data to say this is who the NTIA says provides you with broadband, and these are the speeds they provide you with. Is this correct, and do you subscribe to any of them? So that was presented 11,795 times, keeping in mind that there were a handful of folks that logged on, they couldn't get out at broadband at all. And so they knew that, and that was accurate. Of those, 56% of them said yes, that those that say they provide the broadband are available in our area. 30-some% said no, this is not accurate. And so, but we have to go back to the original caveat that in a census block, they may or may not be providing it, or if they provided it, it may not be to the entire census block. So this was expected. About 12%, they said they weren't sure. And that was they probably had never even investigated getting broadband, they were just taking the survey. 4,187 of the respondents were presented with just one provider. And so that shows you that there's a large portion of the state where there's only one provider out there. When asked if the service was sufficient, 6,220 of the respondents indicated that they subscribed to the service that was presented. Of those 6,220, I can hardly read that, 71% said no, that was not sufficient. 28%, a little bit above that, said yes, it was sufficient. 886 of the folks didn't even respond to that question. I guess that means they didn't quite understand that. So. When we get into the importance of broadband to the folks of Georgia, we asked them two questions. The first question we asked them, what is the importance of broadband in your quality of life? And what is the importance of broadband in your ability to earn a living? And so when we started talking about quality of life, it was staggering. From a very important or somewhat important, over 96% of the folks that responded said for a quality of life, having access to broadband was either very important or somewhat important. When it came to earning a living, over 80% said it was either very important or somewhat important for their ability to earn a living having access to broadband. And so, while we didn't get down to who has broadband in the state, that's a question that I'm always asked, how many people are unserved in the state of Georgia? I have no idea. How many households? We don't know. We don't have an exact number. We know that the large portions of the state of, let me back up on that. Let me say this in a different way. The bulk of the folks that do not have access to broadband are the folks that live in rural Georgia. And a large portion of those folks have access to broadband. But the larger portion of the population that does not have access to broadband, they're going to be more in the rural parts of Georgia than anywhere else. And for those that that need that, do feel that it's very important for their ability to earn a living. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has about broadband, the state of broadband in the state of Georgia, as best I can. There's, like I said, some of it's still anecdotal at best. So.
Does anybody have any questions? John?
Yeah, on the slides you had that showed served, underserved, and unpopulated.
Yes, sir.
I'm very concerned about that slide.
Well, there's a big portion down here near the Okefenokee Swamp.
That's
uninhabitable.
That's why I'm concerned
Just
about.
uninhabitable.
I'm going to have trouble getting reelected with unpopulated.
Actually, I believe that's supposed to say smoke.
What number constitutes unpopulated?
So unpopulated is a census block that reported zero population. So this is using the 2010 census. So that means that in 2010, there was zero population reported on that census block.
I would say that's an understatement.
Okay. So it wasn't where we just made up something. So.
Any any other questions?
Terry.
Yeah. All right, Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. In the counties that show that there is broadband, is it possible that all of the county doesn't have it? Like in my county, it might show it, but all of my county doesn't have broadband.
That's very possible. And especially when you get into rural counties that have large census blocks, and depending upon whether you're looking at the FCC data or NTIA data, it may show up where the entire census block is shown, but there's only 5 people because they're right on the edge of town have access to it, but the rest of the county does not. And so that is very possible. And even with the NTIA data, you can see that you could have census blocks that are showing as being covered, but may or may not be fully covered.
Thank you.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, this may be a unanswerable question or whatever, but when we were sitting there looking at like 3 megs, 10 megs, 25 megs and above or whatever, was there anything taken into consideration of I pay for up to 10 megs or something like that, and what the consistency actually was that you were getting?
So in the survey, we actually did a speed test. And so one of the challenges that we had with the speed test, about 25% of the folks did the speed test. And we're doing some analysis against the speed test versus what they claimed they were subscribing to. But we're also not going to make any, we're not going to make any declarative statements about that, because I'll explain why. Your kids are in the back bedroom downloading HD videos or watching HD videos, and you get into your office and you're going to do a speed test. Your speed test is going to be impacted by what other people are doing in the house. The other thing with speed test is I get on my laptop, I go to do a speed test. You're doing that through a wireless connection, through a wireless router. The best place to do a speed test is where you're connected directly to the modem, that you get the most accurate results. And so the information that we glean from the speed test will not be the declarative, boom, this is it. But we do know for a fact that lots of folks who did the speed, well, actually, one of the things we have looked at is when you hit a certain threshold, and let's say it's 25 megs. Yeah, I subscribe to 25 meg service. What we have found is once you hit that threshold, 9 times out of 10, you're downloading at 25 megs or better. It's getting up to that where they had the biggest issues and problems. That's where things fell below. But once you hit a certain threshold, people are usually off to the races.
I understand that there's a lot of variables involved in that. Yeah, I mean, if your kids are sitting there downloading and your wife's on, an iPad or the side or whatever, is there a margin of error, much like polling, that you could plug into that? Like you're supposed to be getting 10, if you're getting 4, that's not within the margin of error?
I don't think any research has been done on that yet. I know we haven't done anything on that yet. We'll be happy to look at it, and when we release the final results of it, if there's any disclaimers that are associated with that, we'll make sure to label that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Jaspers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the survey, I didn't hear you say it, but you might not have looked at this, but what's the status for broadband, especially at the 25 level for K-12 schools in Georgia and our public libraries? Did you know that?
So at the public libraries, I'm not sure. But I know for a fact that through the E-rate program, every public school has access to excellent broadband in the state of Georgia. That was one of the things that was looked at early on, and Governor Deal set aside monies to make sure that we had connectivity to all the schools, and that has been accomplished. And we need to thank our providers for making sure that that happened, because they were a key part in that.
Representative Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In summary of your presentation, broadband is important to this state for quality of life, for educational attainment. It's important to all of the respondents that we're able to get through.
Right.
And they don't have access in spite of what the maps say.
Right.
What is, if you know, and through your survey, the penetration of wireless in some of these areas that do not currently have DSL access, the penetration of wireless is the technology at the point that you can see some of these 10 meg, 25 meg with a wireless product?
It is just now really starting to come to fruition now. I mean, when we started the survey, there was, I think, a handful of folks out there that had fixed wireless, and they were getting that kind of speed. But I think we're going to start to see it. We're being rolled out in earnest across the state. And the beauty of this is where we're going to actually start to see some real penetration in some of these rural areas. The infrastructure to build out that, while expensive, is not nearly as expensive as digging in the ground to get that done.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you. Last year, I was on a military affairs study committee, and one of the big issues, it wasn't the military bases themselves, but it was the areas around where the families lived. What percentage of the bases have good service around the bases? Do you know that?
I don't know that off the top of my head. We do know that most of the surrounding communities, save Moody, and thanks to Chris Strom for getting on basically getting after them to get Moody's folks on board, responded very well to this survey. And my guess, that's a telltale sign that they were struggling to have access. And so we found that the folks that struggled the most are the ones who responded the most. And so,
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
We do appreciate it.
not a problem.
Our next presenter is Steve Lofton with the Cable Association, and followed by Betty Willis of Windstream and Kevin Curtin with AT&T. So if y'all will, what we'll do, Steve, on this is that you present, the other providers present, and then we'll have time for questions and answers of everybody at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
While they're getting the presentation loaded, I am Stephen Lofton. I'm with the Georgia Cable Association. We're a association of 5 member companies. Let's see what. Great, who are providing access all over the state. They've invested $3 billion over the last 10 years. That investment has led to 12,500 jobs with a payroll of $725 million and serve approximately 1.6 million customers across Georgia. So, Brett, how do I get this moving forward?
I think we're going to have to do it for you.
We're going to start with just a quick little intro. Nope. This is the EMC's favorite slide.
Long distances.
There we go.
Lack
No,
of
this
density
is-
and low broadband.
That's about the middle of the
adoption rates make it
slideshow.
more difficult to serve. Over the last 10 years, the cable industry invested $3 billion to bring high-speed broadband to 1.6 million customers all over Georgia. Not just big cities. Small towns are also benefiting from this investment. Towns like Watkinsville and Douglas have access to 100 megabit broadband because of upgrades funded primarily by private capital. But there are still communities in rural Georgia that don't have the broadband they need because the economics don't line up.
So at the end of this video, there's a bus driving down the road, and I think we've all heard the stories now of students in rural Georgia who are getting out of school. They've got assignments, homework that they need to complete, that sort of thing that they rely on the internet for, and they go home and they can't complete those assignments. They've got to go, as the last presenter mentioned, to Chick-fil-A or a Starbucks or the library in order to go access the internet to get their homework done. And when kids in rural communities can't get their assignments done due to a lack of high-speed broadband, then that's a problem, and that's a real issue that needs to be addressed. And the Cable Association, the Georgia Cable Association, members understand that. We get that, and we're committed to working with you to address it. As was mentioned in the video, our member companies, Comcast, Charter, Mediacom, Cox, and Vive Communications have invested billions to serve their communities, big and small, all over the state. Since we first prepared this presentation, this was actually also given at the November meeting of the Joint High-Speed Access Committee, Mediacom has actually invested more money over the last year or so to bring their technology up to gigabit speed. So the customers in the communities that they serve actually have gigabit speed. That's just as fast as North Fulton. That's just as fast as Atlanta, Chattanooga, anywhere else in the country that has high-speed gigabit city type service. So that's almost 275,000 homes, primarily in rural Georgia. Approximately 750,000 Georgians that now have access to gigabit level service. So we're very proud of that. They're very proud of that, and I'm equally proud to say that our other companies have made similar investments, and the customers that cable serve have very fast internet speeds. And David, I'll just point it. So go to the clicker now. Which button do you want me to click? There we go. Thank you. So the question we always get is, from mayors, from local chambers, from basically anybody who doesn't have, who has limited access is, why can't my community, why can't my neighborhood, why can't my house get service? And I'm sure you're getting that question too. That's why we're here. Because the truth is, if you don't have high quality broadband, if you don't have fast internet speeds, you don't really care what other people have somewhere else around you. You're just focused on what you don't have. And what people don't understand primarily, they want to get it like they get their electric service, like they get their telephone service. They don't understand why they can't get it the same way. And they don't understand the economics of the industry. So let's get into that just a little bit. Decisions are driven by the return on the investment. How quickly can the investment get paid back so that the company can start earning a profit on the capital that it has invested? The cable industry in particular receives very little to no subsidies to provide its service. So everything we do is driven by return on investment. We're investing investors' money. They want to see a return on that investment from the business. And as the companies have consolidated, those decisions are now made on a regional basis rather than in each local market. So communities that were once competing, say, with other communities around them in their area for investment are now competing across the region, possibly even across the nation for that same investment, for that limited pool of investment dollars that are out there. So what determines return on investment? Return on investment, every company measures it differently. I've been to each of the companies. I've looked at how they do their spreadsheets, how they make those decisions. They each have a formula. All of their formulas are slightly different. But at the end of the day, it's whether the money you've invested in serving a particular location can be repaid in a reasonable time frame. That's what matters. And the length of time is all about how much the project costs, which is impacted by factors such as the distance to serve the project, the recurring costs of serving the project. You don't want to build fiber to some place. You don't want to build network to place and then not be able to reinvest in that network later on, because the network does deteriorate. I used an example last night with somebody. It'd be like owning a trucking company, investing in a bunch of trucks, and then never maintaining them. Well, you'll have trucks for about 2.5 years, but eventually those trucks, the tire's going to wear out, the engine's going to wear out, transmission's going to go out, and if you don't have money to reinvest in those trucks, they will end up in a junkyard pretty quickly, right? It's the same thing with the network. If you don't have money to reinvest in that network, it will eventually begin to degrade, the service will drop off, customers will then begin to drop off, and you have a spiraling, just a downward spiral from that point on. So when they make the investment, they're not just looking at the upfront project cost, they're also looking at how much will we be able to make enough money to be able to maintain that network over time. That's another very important piece of it. Those recurring costs include things like pole rent.
Long distances, lack of density, and low broadband adoption rates make it more difficult to serve rural communities. Longer distances, both between communities and from road to home, mean higher construction costs. Lack of density means those higher costs are split by fewer people. And unlike water utilities or power companies, where almost every home takes their service, only about 40% of homes passed take broadband service. The combination of higher costs, few homes along the way, and even fewer using the service in rural areas means the economics don't line up.
I want to stop and pause on that point right there, because we tend to look at the costs and figure out, okay, what can we do to fix that equation? The adoption rate is a really big part of this issue, right? Because when you pass 10 homes and only 4 of them take the service, that it makes your equation that much harder to work, right? Because if you could get a 100% adoption rate, or you don't even have to have 100%. If you got an 80% adoption rate, that sort of thing, you could serve a much broader area. The economics would line up a lot faster for a lot more people. But when you've got, when you put in an investment and you're hoping to get, 35, 40, 45%, that eats away at your ability to make a return on that investment, to justify the expense of building out to that community. So I would ask this council to consider not just those costs of building out and that sort of thing, but also what are some ways that we can help with adoption. And we have some programs that have attempted that. There's not been a lot of work done, honestly, on that around the country. There needs to be more. But distance, density, and adoption, those are the 3 factors that keep rural areas from getting high-speed internet. Those are the drivers. And then again, there are the long-term costs. Most companies include a factor somewhere in their process for this recurring cost of service. One of the big drivers is pole costs. So in rural Georgia, we're primarily served by the EMCs or by a MEAG city, and their pole costs are 2.5 to 3 times what we pay in an urban setting for access to those same poles. The reason for that is the FCC regulates the investor-owned utilities, the EMCs, and the local governments are exempt from the FCC regulation, and so their costs are 2.5 to 3 times higher than the rate that Georgia Power charges us. Another factor is permits and conditions required by local governments. We have a situation right now where a community, a neighborhood is looking for service. They're actually a good candidate to be invested in, but we have a county that is going to put they want to have a certain number of feet between their water lines and the build out, the infrastructure, the network coming in, and so that's going to add. It's going to require a different kind of boring, a more exact kind of boring, and that's going to add tens of thousands of dollars to the project, which is actually going to drop that project down the list. So when you have special conditions like that are put on projects, that makes it more difficult to serve as well. DOT and railroad permits are factors as well. They can take a long time to get the permit, and particularly the railroad can be very expensive to get a permit. Sometimes up to $20,000. $20,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you're trying to serve a cluster of homes on the other side of the tracks from where your line is, and then you got to go underneath that railway, that can become a very limiting factor to how much you can serve. So all these factors are barriers to building rural broadband. Excuse me. We do believe these barriers can be overcome. It won't be easy, but we do think there are some solutions out there. Very quickly, I think Kevin is going to address this later through AT&T because they're more involved in this program, but the FCC has the CAF2 program that's currently going on. That's going to help in limited areas, limited rural areas around the state over the next 10 years. Windstream is also part of this, as is CenturyLink and Frontier, and they're going to be required to build wireless service, I believe, that's going to have at least 10 megabits downstream and 1 megabit upstream. Cable companies are not part of this program. We were not invited. Also at the federal level, you have the Universal Service Fund, which primarily benefits the rural telephone companies, the smaller companies. My understanding is that's being transitioned into a broadband fund by the FCC, also something we're not allowed to participate in. But there's more that can be done. Our vision would be to make Georgia the #1 state in the country to invest in broadband. And there are some things that the state can do policy-wise to make this happen. We think our goal should be to encourage more broadband investment in more communities. And the question then is, how do we get there, right? So first is encourage broadband adoption. We need to make the ROI, that return on investment, easier to achieve. There are a number of states, for example, who do not tax network equipment. So there's no sales tax on network equipment. That makes a big difference when we're competing regionally for those investment dollars. If South Carolina and North Carolina don't tax the network equipment, but Georgia does, that's an additional 4, 5, 6, 7%, depending on the city or the county you're purchasing that equipment in, that gets added to the cost of that service. So we're added to the cost of that project. That does make a difference. Next is pole rent. Our friends in the EMCs don't appreciate this. They don't like this. But the fact is that we pay 3 times as much as we do in the cities to get our network on those poles and out to rural communities. If there was a way to limit those pole fees, or a credit for paying those pole fees, I understand this is a thorny political issue. We get that. We've lived it for the last decade. But that is a driver in this debate. It should not be ignored. And then finally, helping with the permits and the conditions, helping to speed those up, making sure that when we're dealing with local governments, that there's an understanding that the fewer impediments, the easier it is to serve, the lower the cost, the easier it is to serve that community. So thank you very much, Chairman, members of the council. Look forward to answering your questions after the next 2 presenters. Thank you.
Good morning. Again, my name is Betty Willis. I am with Windstream Communications. The next time that we have to do this, if we have to do this again, I'm just going to stand next to Stephen and say amen, especially because his graphics are so good, and everything he said is applicable, I think, across technologies. The issues of how we overcome the economics is something that we all face, and not unique to any particular technology. Okay. Okay, is it? All right, right clicker, right? Got it. So Windstream is committed to making its network faster and more reliable to keep pace with rising demand and capacity, driven by more and more devices that now access the internet in homes. You heard Eric talk earlier about the surveys and those sort of things. I bet you all 12,000 of those customers were probably mine, because many of them in North Georgia. So we have heard our customers, we've listened to our customers, and we have spent a substantial amount of dollars and resources investing in our broadband network in the state of Georgia to provide our customers a best-in-class experience on a world-class network. Since 2014, we have spent approximately $162 million. In 2017 through April of this year, we've spent approximately $17 million to invest in capacity to support growing consumer demand, improve our speed profiles, improve reliability, and future-proof our core network. We have our model in terms of how we get broadband to our customers is what we call a fiber to the node model. There are three factors, as Stephen talked about earlier, that affect speed: loop length, which is the distance between our facility and the customer's home; the electronics that provide the service; and backhaul, which is the fiber that takes the traffic back to the internet. We employ a fiber to the node approach in most cases when providing this service in rural areas. This approach has proven to be the best method of getting more service to more customers, especially in rural areas where a fiber to the home approach would cost millions of dollars, cause consumer prices to skyrocket beyond affordability, and it's simply just not necessary. To date, approximately 97% of our consumer and small business customers are now served with fiber-fed nodes. And you see the diagram there that sort of maps out how all of those three factors, loop length, electronics, and backhaul, impact the service. And Windstream has invested in all of that in order to bring faster speeds to more of our customer base. We started a project a couple of years ago to even convert the fiber-fed nodes to Ethernet-fed VDSL to G-bond cable nodes, which allows us to bring even faster speeds to more customers. At this point, more than 86% of our customers now qualify for speeds of 10 megabits or higher, more than 50% for speeds of 25 megabits, and approximately 26% of our customers qualify for speeds 50 megabits or higher. You saw the maps that Eric produced earlier based on 2014 data. And for my company, and probably for cable and AT&T as well, there's been a substantial amount of investment, upgrades, and build-out that has occurred since 2014 that would, in my opinion, definitely change the look of those maps in terms of what's available and what's not available. And we're able to offer these premium speeds without replacing the copper from the node to the home. If you think back to the previous diagram, from the home to our serving node, and that's those little cabinets that you sometimes see in your neighborhood or on the side of the roads. And in a lot of instances, that's copper for us. But that serving node is then served by fiber and electronics that allow us to bring premium speeds up to 100 megs to many of our customers. We do have some areas in our network or in our footprint where we have fiber to the home. And in those cases, we are offering 1 gig service to those customers. Right now, it's about 15 communities in the North Georgia area where we're able to offer 1 gig service to customers who want the service. And Stephen talked about subscribership, customers who actually purchase these higher speeds. And that is an issue that has to be overcome when we talk about the economics of putting services out here. We may offer the service, but that doesn't mean a customer is going to subscribe to it. So that, I think, is one of the issues that we do have to talk about when we're talking about broadband in rural Americas, is also getting customers to actually really subscribe to the service. That is a part of the economic issue that occurs. In addition to what we're doing with our DSL product, Windstream is also enhancing our cable TV network in the North Georgia area that will allow us to bring speeds of 100 megabits to approximately 67,000 cable customers across North Georgia. And if you look at this map, all of that area, the red line, the red part of it is our cable footprint in the North Georgia area where we will be offering the 100 meg service. The service is already available now in Blairsville, and we will be launching it in 14 other communities over the next several months in 2017. Stephen also talked during his presentation about federal funding. Windstream was fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of some of the federal funding programs that are available or were available. One was the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Utility Service Broadband Initiative Program. Windstream invested about $25.3 million, 66% provided by RUS, 34% or $8.6 million provided by Windstream. And this enabled us to provide first-time or upgraded broadband to nearly 8,000 locations across Georgia. Another program from the FCC is the Connect America Fund Phase 1 program, which we did participate in as well, which enabled development of fiber in the middle mile between our central offices and the neighborhood nodes. This was, for us, the most efficient way to provide faster internet service to the greatest number of rural customers lacking those services. And this impacted more than 20,000 residential customers. Windstream matched this funding 1-to-1. And the final program that we are participating in is the Connect America Fund Phase 2. That is the current program. We accepted approximately $24 million annually through 2020, and that will impact over 64,000 customers in FCC specified census blocks based on their model, and not something that we didn't pick and choose, but based on what the model determined. But even with all of this support, the federal government never intended that funding to provide 100% or ubiquitous broadband access across rural America. There are still areas, pockets of areas, that even the FCC considers too high cost to fund. This is just a visual of the areas that were impacted by some of the federal funding, and you can see how scattered out it is across our footprint. So it hit spots and then missed spots. So how can the state help? Again, the issues with rural broadband are getting the services, the network, closer to the customer. Distance is an issue. And Stephen talked about all of these things, but let me just reiterate what he said is elimination of state and local sales tax on investment in broadband infrastructure would certainly help incent providers to invest limited investment dollars in Georgia rather than another state. He talked about South Carolina and North Carolina, where there is no tax on these on the broadband infrastructure. So for a national company like Windstream and others, where we're comparing where to put these limited investment dollars, it does make a difference in terms of how those dollars fall out across our national footprint. We also support and have participated in some other states in broadband grant programs. Different states do it differently. Some states have set aside pots of money from their general budget, and you're able to, and it's technology neutral, and companies are able to apply for those dollars on a project basis. Some states have converted their state universal service to broadband funds, similar to what the FCC has done, and again, made those funds available. There are varying methods to do that. Even in this state, several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, the providers worked with One Georgia to come up with a model to develop how we interact with communities in rural areas and how One Georgia could help supplement the economics and make the economics work. Those meetings started out pretty good. I don't think we ever came to any conclusion, but again, another opportunity to dialogue about how to overcome the economics, which is the key problem that we all face. Private providers like Windstream will continue to invest in its network, but will ultimately need help to close those gaps that we've all talked about. We have an extensive network that allows us to offer internet access to the vast majority of consumers in our service territory, but there are pockets of customers who are underserved or unserved. At the end of the day, the economics is the barrier that all providers in rural Georgia must overcome, and we encourage the state to consider targeted programs that are aimed at changing those economics to help defray the cost for providers to bring robust broadband service to these underserved areas. That's it. Yeah, end of that. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Good morning. Kevin Curtin with AT&T. Thanks for the invitation to come speak this morning about an issue that's very important to our company and to me personally, rural broadband. Actually was our regional manager in Southeast Georgia and Savannah, the whole 912 area code back when we started deploying broadband back in the late 90s. So it's something that I saw come about from its infancy and care a lot about. I'm going to click through these slides pretty quickly because I have a lot of slides, but I have some good news about some future technologies we're working on at AT&T, which I think really will move the needle for rural Georgia. First of all, just kind of an overview. Right? Yeah, that's right. We have about 19,000, actually more than 19,000 people who work for AT&T here in Georgia. I think we're the third largest private employer in the state as of today. That number will grow over time because we're in the process of buying Time Warner. And Time Warner, obviously one of their big divisions is Turner Broadcasting in Atlanta. That's about another 6,000 people. So by the end of the year, we should have more than 25,000 people working for AT&T in the state of Georgia, which makes it one of our largest employment centers in the whole company. Back. There we go. This is what we invest in the state. Actually not last 3 years, but between 13 and 15, those 3 years, we invested about $5.5 billion in capital in the state of Georgia. And we do that through really two networks, our wired network and our wireless network. We operate both of those, which is a little unusual compared to the two presenters before. We actually provide both wireless and wireline service. We also provide satellite service, but that's not an investment in Georgia, that's an investment in outer space. So, what has that investment done? This is a map of our wireless network at the end of 2012 compared to the end of 2016. And I think anybody who lives in this part of the state will acknowledge that there's been a dramatic difference in AT&T's coverage in central and south Georgia over that period of time. A lot of that was driven by the fact that we bought a remnant of an old company called Altel and converted that over to the AT&T network. And then we were under a massive building program to build towers around the state. So today we have over 3.6 million miles of fiber in the state of Georgia deployed today. And that number continues to grow every month. We did about 2,000 upgrades in the last 3 years to our network. and it serves about 99.9% of the population of Georgia. The wireless network does at this point. So that kind of gives you an overview of what we're doing on the wireless side. On the wired side, what we spent the last few years doing is building a lot of fiber. And what we've done to date is serve about 500,000 homes and businesses around the state with a direct fiber connection. So a lot of times it's called AT&T Fiber. Fiber, bring it into your house or into your business, a direct fiber connection, which allows you to go at least gigabit of speed to your house or business. And we've deployed that in 43 communities that are all listed there on that slide. And that list of communities continues to grow. In fact, I think the most recent deployment we did was in Savannah. So we just added Savannah to that footprint just recently. And the number of homes in each one of those communities will continue to grow, as well as the number of communities will continue to grow. So a lot of that money has gone into fiber. Next slide shows you a fiber program we've worked on the business side over the last 2 years. We created a new program called AT&T Fiber Ready. It's an economic development program where we go to local economic development agencies and say, when we've got fiber sitting in your development park, and it's probably been there sometimes for years, but nobody knows that because it's in the ground. There's no way to know that it's just sitting there. And we hear often from economic development folks that having fiber in their economic development projects is very important in their industrial parks. So what we have done is we've partnered with economic development agencies around the state, and you see the little marks on the map of the ones we've done, and we've actually done some here locally over the last few years, 2 years, and this is a 2-year-old program, to develop the Fiber Ready program, meaning if you could bring your business to this industrial park, fiber sitting in the ground and we can hook you up. So it's a great way to advertise the parks as being future ready, and it's a great way for us to show the investment we've made around the state. And the number of development parks around the state will continue to grow. That's sort of in its infancy, but we expect to have a lot more industrial parks around the state signed up in that program in the near term. It was mentioned earlier that Connect America Fund 2, Phase 2. That is a new program we're starting to roll out. It actually just started rolling out this month for us here in Georgia, May of this year. And we are the first state in the country to start this build. It's a fixed wireless internet product. It's a brand new product for us. I'm very excited about this product because of the promise it holds for rural Georgia. And what I mean by that is that in rural Georgia, the economics, as you've heard earlier, are very difficult on a wired basis. And I think Eric mentioned that in his presentation as well. We think wireless holds a lot of promise for rural Georgia. So this is a wireless broadband product, which we started rolling out. And this is how it works. We bring fiber to the cell site. We put in a different antenna up when the antenna is simply for this wired broadband product. It is not the traditional wireless network that we run today. It's a separate antenna, and that separate antenna creates a signal which goes to your house. We mount an antenna on the side of your house to collect the signal, bring it into your router, into your house. So as far as the customer knows, it's a broadband connection like any other broadband connection. It's just delivered wirelessly the last mile. Much more cost-efficient way to provide broadband in less dense areas. And I'll show you sort of where we're bringing this product. This is a map of Georgia. All the colored area are the areas that are our traditional wireline footprint in Georgia. We're the largest wireline telephone company in the state. I think Windstream is number 2. The white areas are areas that are not in our service footprint. The green parts you see there are the CAF-eligible census blocks, meaning those are the census blocks the Federal Communications Commission has identified and subsidized us to build this wireless broadband product with. Within that green area is where we're going to be deploying this product. This product started being deployed this month and will run through 2020, so it's the next 3 years. As I said earlier, we've already started deploying this product in Georgia. It was the first state in the country to get this. We're deploying this in 18 states. It's the first large-scale fixed wireless internet project in the United States. And Georgia was the first one to turn up. We're very proud of that. We worked very hard to make sure that we were the first one to turn up. We've already turned up 36 sites in the counties you see up there on the slide, and we're doing 6 more this week. In fact, I think tomorrow we're launching several sites down in Decatur County. At the end of the program, we'll have about 67,000 homes have this product available to it that are in the green areas I showed you on the last slide. And most of these homes, this will be the first time they'll have broadband available to them. This is a 10-1 product. What I mean by that is a 10 megabit down, 1 megabit up speeds. That's the minimum speeds it will achieve. And frankly, the first folks we've turned up on this network are getting higher speeds than 10-1, much higher speeds than 10-1. But obviously, as the network gets loaded, that 10-1 standard must be achieved. But the first people on that network will get much, much higher speeds. One of the things we're also doing, we think is a really great future technology. So the first future technology is starting to be deployed, fixed wireless internet, which I just talked about. The second technology, which we're very excited about, is small cell or 5G technology. It's a wireless technology that's on the cusp of being deployed. We have committed to start deploying that product or service by the end of 2018. And what 5G needs is small cells, so that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. And what are small cells? Why are they needed? Well, quite frankly, they're needed because data demand on our network has grown substantially. 250,000% since 2007 is the increase in data on our wireless network. As you know from experience, personal experience, people can't seem to take these things out of their hands nowadays, especially anybody under the age 25 seems to be hermetically connected to this thing and use it constantly. I know I have 2 teenagers and I can't pry them from their hands. And that we don't think that will continue, that will stop anytime soon. So what are small cells and why are they the future? Many of you in the room were around, we worked on a bill in 2014 to streamline the cell siting process, if you remember that. I remember Representative Hatchett was involved through committee and Representative Parsons, it was your bill, where we streamlined the tower siting process for the big 200-foot towers that we put cell antennas on. And at the time, a lot of people came to us and said, isn't there some way for you to enhance coverage without having to put more of those big towers up, because I don't want to look at them. I mean, nobody likes to look at a tower, but everyone likes to use the tower, right? So everyone wants 5 bars, but nobody wants to look at the tower. And at the time, the answer was, unfortunately, that's the only way to get the signal to you is a big tower. Well, that's no longer the answer. 5G and small cells, are the future of our network for the wireless network. And what they are, the macro tower is the big tower, the 200-foot tower, which you see out in the field today. The small cell will be placed much more close to the customer and will have a much different range profile, but it will enhance the network from both a speed and a capacity perspective. And what do I mean by that? When you blow signal off of a 200-foot tower, the macro tower at the top there on a 4G LTE network, which is the network we have out there today, you can get anywhere from a half mile to 20 miles range on that. Typically, it's around 3 to 4 miles range off of a 200-foot tower. And the higher your tower, the more the range is typically. As I said, those are harder and harder to get permitted and frankly sited because nobody wants to look at the things. So what we're doing is instead of putting up more 200-foot towers, we're starting to deploy small cells. And small cells can be mounted on utility poles, light poles, traffic poles, stuff that's already sitting in the right-of-way along highways, downtown areas for smaller towns, etc. And you can see the coverage radius only gets from 500 to 1,200 feet. So it's a much smaller serving radius, but you can go much, much higher speeds because of the technology. And then also, when you get down to 5G, which is the new technology that's going to be deployed starting next year, that radius even shrinks more to 250 to 750 feet, a much smaller radius, but you can go much, much faster. 5G technology purports to go at least 10 gigabits a second. So that's like taking a fiber connection times it by 10. That's the theoretical maximum of a 5G connection. So you can see you're going to skip from a DSL or a VDSL connection up to a multi-fiber connection on 5G. What do these things look like when they're deployed? Let me skip that one. This is what they look like. The one in the middle is, I took a picture of that. I don't think I was probably supposed to be using my phone, but on the street, but I did. I was driving in my car. I think it was stationary. Oh no, it was green light, never mind. I guess I busted myself on that one. Hopefully there's no law enforcement. I must have been texting while driving, but unfortunately. But I took a picture of this one on Peachtree Street right outside of our office, frankly. You can see that there's a little antenna mounted at the top of a existing traffic light. That little can at the top is an omnidirectional antenna that creates a lot of cell phone signal, a lot of capacity for folks who use cell phones in Midtown Atlanta. You can see some other examples of them around in the other pictures. Most of them are very hard to detect, and I'm one of the few people who probably looks for those things because I work for AT&T. But if I hadn't looked for them, I probably would never have noticed those small cells being deployed. What is the smart public policy to get to an environment where you can deploy more of these small cells? Like I said, the macro towers are things that are very difficult to site and were very challenging from a public policy perspective because of the visual. These are much more hard to detect, much easier to hide, but we still run into problems, quite frankly. A lot of jurisdictions, this is new to them. They don't understand how to permit them. They're very challenged. They try to fit small cells into a macro cell environment. They're very different. So one of the things we're encouraging people to do is to come up with some uniform standards around the state to deploy small cells. And what I mean by that is to establish some streamlined permitting processes, to come up with master level agreements so we can go in and say, here are the 26 small cells we want to put around Vidalia and get them all permitted at one time through a master lease agreement of the facilities that the city of Vidalia may own. And then also to ensure that pole attachment rates to municipal and county-owned facilities are reasonable. Because quite frankly, that's been a huge challenge in some jurisdictions where they've asked for, over $2,000 or $3,000 per pole to attach to a utility pole. Now, the economics just don't work at $2,000 or $3,000 per attachment. In fact, we have one jurisdiction that not only has asked for $2,000 to $3,000 per pole, but told us that if we place a pole and put our antenna on it ourselves, after we place the pole, they will then confiscate ownership of the pole, which was, I think, illegal, but okay. So that's the second new technology, small cells, 5G. The third technology is one that we're actually trying to do a trial on later this year, and it's called AirGig. And I'm going to try to see if I can figure out how to play that video. Oh, there you go. This is just a little video on AirGig and what it is, and I'll explain it after the video.
Innovators, inventors, our ranks are full of them, continuously evolving, failing fast and trying again. We watch the world change, then we change ourselves to be one step ahead. That's what innovation and invention is about, and we're not done. Meet Project AirGig. We found a way to send multi-gigabit speeds using infrastructure you see every day, power lines. It starts with low-cost plastic antennas and devices developed in our labs. When these devices are placed along the power lines, the signals travel around or near the lines, not through them. These millimeter wave signals can enable ultra-fast connections nearly anywhere in a big city, rural town, in the US, or around the world. This project has the potential to bring it to you where you live, work, and play. Smartphone, tablet, self-driving cars, augmented reality, telemedicine. We thought about all of it. One of our strengths is delivering what we call oxygen, or connectivity, to people in a variety of ways. What you see looks simple, what it does isn't. This isn't your parents' telephone company. This is the future, and it's closer than you might think.
Got a little ad in there too, but that is a very exciting technology. Let me explain a little bit more in depth than what the video showed you. Our labs, our AT&T labs, have invented a technology, and they've already filed 200 patent applications on this technology that create antennas that are mounted on utility poles next to power lines. Now, we don't use the power lines themselves to transmit the signal. We actually use the millimeter waves that come off of a power line as the transport medium for the broadband signal. What that does with those low-cost antennas that we can put and mount near the power lines is create multi-gigabit speeds to anybody who has, theoretically, anybody who has aerial power delivered to their house. And what I mean by aerial power is power delivered on a utility pole above ground. It doesn't work in a residential suburban neighborhood that has underground power, but most people in rural Georgia get their power aerial on a telephone pole. So if this technology pans out the way we hope it will, this will create a huge opportunity and really be a game changer for rural broadband, because we can mount these things, provide gigabit speeds to everybody who has aerial power, and technology will be a large portion of the solution to this problem, quite frankly. So very excited about that. We hope to do a trial. We actually announced we will do a trial on that project this year in the field, working with a power partner here in the United States, and we're going to do one internationally as well to see how it works overseas. So we should have some experience under our belt by the end of the year as to how well this works in a real field trial. This has worked great on our corporate campus where they built power lines to test this, but we're going to do an actual field trial working with an actual power provider this year. So that's all well and good. So I'm getting a click. Next. Oh, there it goes. So what things do we think would be helpful from a public policy perspective to enhance the deployment of broadband around the state of Georgia? A few things, and some of these you've heard before, and I swear we did not coordinate these before we got here today, but we actually do have the same challenges and problems as the cable industry and Windstream to some extent. One of them is to create very streamlined processes to get access to the right-of-way for all broadband. What I mean by that is for years, access to the right-of-way has always been guaranteed for telephone companies. We've been using the right-of-way in Georgia for 140 years, okay, since 1879 when we started doing business in Georgia. But when you start deploying broadband and not voice service, the laws have not kept up with the technology. What I mean by that is the last time the laws for right-of-way for telephone service were edited, the statute still said telegraph service. And I mean, it literally said telegraph service. We need to update that statute. Today, if you deploy strictly a wired broadband product out there with no voice service, you pay right-of-way fees that are astronomical, because unfortunately the current statute defaults down to the DOT rate, which is up to $5,000 per linear mile every year. So that's a real problem. Let me click forward to one slide and show you why that's so much of a problem. Try. No? It's a really good slide. The next slide shows you that, oh, there we go. In the Southeast, the only two states that charge right-of-way fees for the state right-of-way are Georgia and Louisiana. All of our surrounding states charge nothing to use the state right-of-way. But Georgia, we charge astronomical fees to use the state right-of-way. So that's something the state should look into. Paying up to $5,000 per linear mile per year adds a lot of cost to your broadband projects. Louisiana only charges them on certain bridges and highways, so actually Georgia is the only one that ubiquitously charges state highway right-of-way fees. So that's a real challenge. Let me click back to this slide. So 35 states charge no fees to access the state right-of-way. Georgia is not one of those 35 states. Yes, sir.
Who exactly do you pay that money to?
The DOT.
And then they determine the cost?
Yeah, and it's actually a very old regulation that has existed for years and hasn't been looked at for a long time and needs to be looked at again, quite frankly. If you read the regulation, it actually talks about inter-exchange companies. So it's a very old regulation. It needs to be updated. And then the last two things I will mention is, just like Stephen and Betty mentioned, was we think that the sales tax on broadband deployment should be eliminated. 23 states have already eliminated their sales tax on broadband deployments. We think Georgia should be one of those as well. What that means is, we're a national company like ours that does business in every state in the country. We look for the best place to invest our money. If we can invest $1 million in North Carolina and serve more people than we can in Georgia because North Carolina doesn't charge a sales tax, we're going to put that money in North Carolina. Let's make Georgia a very attractive place to deploy that capital. And then the last thing, and this gets to adoption, develop some programs to make folks aware of the benefits of broadband. If you look at the national statistics, which Eric alluded to earlier, We're actually above average in broadband availability in Georgia. I think we're number 19 in the country, so the median's 25. So we're number 19, we're above average. When it comes to adoption, we're number 28, so we're below average on adoption. So unfortunately, adoption plays a large factor in how much you deploy in a state. So if a state, you deploy a lot and nobody uses it, then you're not going to deploy as much broadband in that state. And unfortunately, we're below average on adoption in Georgia, so I think there's some work to be done there as well. That's all I have, and I'll be glad to answer questions with the rest of the group. Thank you.
All right. Sure, we have a question or two. Representative Rogers.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one of the last things that
Wait,
Kevin.
just 1 second. Eric, if you would come up and join our panelists too. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, I'll pick up on one of the last things that you just said, and Stephen, it was something that you addressed. I think Betty probably picked up on it also. Let's talk about that adoption process, okay? The number you said, Stephen, was like about 40%, something like that?
I think that Stephen said their number's 40%.
Yeah.
The number I used was the FCC's looked at adoption rates per state. We're in 25 being the median. We're number 28 in the country from adoption perspective for those who have it available to them. So we're actually below average on adoption, above average on availability. So that's a challenge for the state.
All right. Have you guys done anything as far as looking at the demographics of the adoption? What areas, I mean, like the demographics of like the elderly versus the younger, the this, the that, or whatever, because we're dealing with rural Georgia, seeing the numbers that we were yesterday, you have an elderly population. And, you know, Kevin, you were talking about to develop programs to educate people on the benefits of adoption. You know, you're not going to have to educate my kids, but you may have to educate me. I mean, have you guys looked at that at all? And what are you doing from that perspective? Because it seems to me, if we're dealing with a rural aspect and we have an elderly population and they're not adopting and therefore you're not investing, you're not going to get the young ones back unless we come full circle.
It's a vicious cycle, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22 kind of situation.
Yeah,
But
that's the
you're
words I
right.
used was the catch-22. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, demographically, the younger are much heavier users of broadband internet than the older population. One of the things that we think that can be done is to push more city and county and state services online. I mean, one of the reasons people start using online services is because that's where they have to go to do certain things. And quite frankly, it makes their lives easier. But unless they understand that there's a value to doing that, a good example of that is renewing my driver's license. I did that recently. That was really simple. I went on the internet and did it in about 5 minutes as opposed to standing at the DMV for, quite a while. So those are just a few examples of things that could be done to spur adoption because people see it as being useful in their lives versus something kids play with, But you're right, demographically, it does skew quite a bit.
I'll just follow up real quickly on a point Kevin just made about about online services being available. We actually did an unscientific survey of the cities and the counties in Georgia, and about 2/3 of them either don't have a website or the website is static, meaning it's just information on a page. There's no back. There's nothing you can actually do on the site. So we would love to see some programs established around that as well, maybe through DCA, where they encourage cities to put more, provide some funding to the cities that need some help to put more of their services online. We think that'd be a cost saving to the city as well.
Okay, Representative Werkheiser.
Thank you. Two things, and actually our finance chairs may be able to answer that, but could we get, and I know you don't have this off the top of your head, the amount of money that the DOT would be affected by if we eliminated access fees? And I think because obviously DOT is probably going to balk at that. So if we could have that budget number in the future. And the other thing was regarding the fiber-ready sites. Is that something that y'all select, or are the individual economic development communities coming to y'all and saying, I mean, how does that process go?
Well, we have a list of sites that we know are fiber ready, meaning there is fiber in the ground sitting there. So we typically approach the industrial authority in those communities and say, hey, this is there. Let's put this thing together so that we can advertise that it's there. So we generally approach them. Quite frankly, most of them are very receptive. Some of them are just so busy that we don't get around to doing it for a while. And it takes a while to get this thing approved and adopted by all their board and all that sort of thing. But typically, we approach them, but we're always willing to talk to them if we do have an industrial park where we don't have facilities there or the kind of facilities they need, we're always open to that dialogue as well.
Okay, thank you.
Representative England.
Okay, Chairman McCall and I are analog guys in the digital world. We can tell you the difference between a 20 horsepower tractor and a 200 horsepower tractor and what that can do. Can somebody explain the difference between 10 megs, 1 meg, 1 gig? Can y'all put that in, somebody put that into perspective for me, because I don't know that I have ever truly understood the difference. I understand the higher the number, the better the speed is, but I don't.
Yeah, and and it's much like anything else. There's a point of diminishing returns at some point. Fast is fast. They say. One of my colleagues at work has a gigabit internet connection in his house, and he said, I can't tell the difference between 1 gigabit and 100 megabits, quite frankly. So even though it's 100 times.
It's just that's the flow of information.
Right,
So
a
gig is
1,000
megabits.
Exactly.
So, okay.
So it's all relative. As an example, just people oftentimes put these categories, 25 or 10, or Eric was talking about that earlier. I live in Grant Park. I live a mile from the Capitol. I have a 10 megabit connection at my house, okay? I can get faster than that, but I don't choose to subscribe to more than that, even though I work for AT&T, and I get it half price. Because I've never found, full disclosure, but I've never found anything I can't do with 10 megabits. So,
Okay, so if you're looking at something with 3 versus 10,
Yeah.
what would be the difference in the amount of information that could be downloaded over a period of time?
From my perspective, and I live in rural Georgia, and I started out with 3 megabit service. Give you an example. When you want to go watch a movie on Netflix, it's going to buffer. It's going to go and it's going to buffer. It's going to go and it's going to buffer. As soon as you hit that 10 megabit threshold, all of a sudden, you can pretty much still watch a movie and it never buffers. Now, if you get 2 people in there, the kids are doing homework in the back and you're up front watching a movie, you may get a little buffering. And that goes to that quality of life. And as I said, once you hit like 50 megabits or 100 megabits, there are very few people, unless they're running a large data-heavy business out of their house, where they're having to basically transmit large amounts of information, they're very rarely going to have any issues with that. Now, that's one thing. The other thing we have to keep in mind is downloading information and uploading information.
That was my next question.
So when we download information, basically we make a request, I want to watch this movie, Secondhand Lions, and bring down, watch all that stuff, and it's great. I want to upload information. I want to send something out on my email. It's a big picture, or maybe it's a movie clip with the grandkids playing or something like that. That's another big challenge, because now we have two-way communication. Generally speaking, most connections are going to be much slower going up than they are coming down.
And why is that?
I'll let these folks answer that.
Thanks for giving me this question. I appreciate that. Generally because users want more download speed than upload speed. If users wanted more upload speed, we'd flip it. But typically you want to be able to download your Netflix a lot faster than you want to send your email with a large file. Right, that's more important to customers, so that's the way we've built the network. More and more of the network is becoming equal, bidirectional. You'll be able to get, as the download speed goes up, the upload speed tends to increase as well. And in the fiber to the home environment, you have a gig potentially in both directions.
Representative Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I've actually got a couple questions. The first one, I guess, is I've heard a lot of common themes about the economics and poll costs and sales tax, elimination for network equipment. As far as economics go, I'm trying to understand. I live in rural Colquitt County, and I have excellent service. But I have family members and friends that live in, say, Morgan and Oconee counties, which are much higher populated areas, that don't have service. So I'm trying to understand why I have service in a rural, unpopulated area, but they are in a populated area, but yet do not have service. First question.
So I'll start with that. It's all about the address. It's all about the location of that home or that business. If you're near a network that has the ability to very easily take a piece of fiber and extend it, then you are going to be able to get service, quickly, efficiently, that sort of thing. If for whatever reason you're a couple miles from the nearest node, and because we do the same system as Windstream, although we connect fiber to the node, and then we use coax, which is a more robust network than the old copper system is. But if that node is already built out as much as it can build out, you may have to then build another node closer to that home or to that neighborhood, which increases the cost. So there's no one situation that's the same everywhere all over the state. Every single situation is unique. It's all different. The companies have to go out. They have to walk the neighborhood. They have to walk the site. They have to see what barriers are in the way. They have to determine where that sits on the network, where they would feed it from, and then what the cost would be from that point on. If you're in a lucky situation where there's a node available that has capacity on it, and you're just a couple hundred feet away, something like that, then that's a very simple build. If you could have a neighborhood of 150, 200 homes, but if it's far enough away from because developers don't always look for the network, right? They look for the land that's the easiest that they can put a large amount of homes on, and then we typically are the last thing they think about for whatever reason, and then we're the first ones that get blamed when we can't reach them because it's too far away to serve economically. But it's just that there's every situation is unique, Representative Watson.
Right, but you would know that there would be demand there because the grid is full, right? So there would be a need to make the economics work, right?
Well, there's the demand may be there, but the economics may still not work, right? If you've got a large enough build out there, if you're going to serve 100 homes and you're going to make $10,000 off of those 100 homes, but it costs $2 million to get the service there, the model, you just never get there. You never pay it back in time to actually start reinvesting in the network to keep it up. You never make a profit on that investment, and you can't do that as a for-profit company. Sure, go ahead.
One thing that I always try to remind people is none of our networks were designed as a broadband network when we built them, okay? Our network was designed to talk on the telephone, our landline network. It was never designed to be a broadband network. What we've done over the years is retrofit a voice network to make it a broadband network. Betty's companies is probably the same, and Stephen's companies all were designed to be cable companies, not broadband providers. So these technologies aren't perfect overlay mechanisms, meaning you may, for voice service, the way you design your network made a lot of sense. But in a broadband world, it doesn't make as much sense because, I'll get real technical. In a voice world, signals travel much further down a copper pair than a broadband signal will. So you can talk 18,000, 20,000 feet and pick up the telephone on a copper pair and still talk to the central office and talk to the rest of the world. On broadband, your signal would never get to that house. So your network needs to be much more tightly built, much more highly capacity built than it was built originally. So to do that, it takes a lot of investment and a lot of retrofitting of your network. So it's just to keep that in mind is that these networks were not designed to do this to start with. This is broadband's only been around 20 years. It's a pretty new product. Voice service has been around 140 years. So we designed the network to do something totally different from the beginning.
Okay. And I guess second question, Mr. Chairman, is we use a lot of GPS on the farm, and I'm trying to understand what the difference between the signals and what's transmitted there that's different than what we use on our telephone and what we use in the cab of the tractor, and is that technology not compatible either way?
Well, first off, with GPS, you're receiving a signal to basically report back onto your system, basically something from space, a satellite signal. All you are receiving at that point in time. Very rarely with GPSs are you transmitting both ways. So that's one thing. And the amount of information that you're transmitting is very small, whereas with broadband, it's very large. And so those are two completely different technologies, and they run on completely different bandwidths there. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, kinda, sorta.
Well, if it doesn't, this is actually something I know a little bit about, so I am an expert there, so.
Representative Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen, you referenced in your presentation helping the permitting process with local governments. Can you kind of share some of your concerns about that permitting process?
Well, every local government is different. Some of the we have great relationships with most of our local governments. They understand the link between getting a permit done quickly and efficiently and at minimal cost to, getting the network out into their communities. In other situations, you can run into situations where a community wants, like I said, there was one that wanted our wire to be a certain number of feet away from the water main, and it was an additional requirement beyond and above what normally we're asked to do by local governments. So that was going to cost us more because that's different than what is normally done. It was going to cost the company more that was involved in that project. So you can have some that are very easy to work with. You can have others that are very difficult to work with. We just wouldn't. We would, and just encourage local governments to please try to work with us, prioritize these projects, and then, and from there, we'd rather handle it that way than through legislation or doing something like that. But permitting is important. When it slows a project down, when it costs more than it should to provide the network, to provide the permits for the network, then it inhibits our ability to serve.
Okay. One other question, Mr. Chairman, just one other. One of the concerns that I'm hearing from constituents in my area is they're having to have access to their landline. They have a cell phone, landline, and if they want to increase their speed of internet service, that's going to cause their landline phone bill to increase. Is there a way to eliminate that or not? They must have that landline in order to have the internet service?
Yeah, that's just a requirement of whoever the local telephone provider is. We used to do that years ago. We used to require you to have a voice line in order to get a DSL line. We don't require that anymore. We sell both of those as standalone products at this point. But there may be some telephone companies that still require that, meaning you must have a voice line in order to have a broadband line. But that's just a company decision. Typically, that's not regulatory of any nature that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Reinders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of financial questions, local, state, and federal. First of all, the tax exemption that you reference, we have, as a legislative body, have seen and heard concerns and looked at it legislatively on dollars not being allocated or spent like we thought they were going to be, as it relates to Hope Scholarship administrative cost, as it relates to some of the rural hospital initiatives and administration fees. If I were to vote for an exemption and only got a 20% return on that 80%, on that 100% in rural Georgia, and it was used because your investors are looking at other states or looking at micro satellites in Midtown Atlanta, tell me why I shouldn't look at asking for y'all to come up with something that guarantees us 100% of that tax exemption you're getting would be used in rural Georgia.
I'll take a swag at it. To answer your question directly, Chairman Parsons had a bill to do that this year, and it was only ineligible counties, which were all rural. So the only way you get the tax exemption is to spend the money in that county. So it's a self-effectuating tax situation, essentially. If you spend $1 million in Fulton County, you don't save anything. You had to spend it in a county. I think his bill had a trigger of a certain amount of broadband unavailability in that county as the trigger. So it was targeted toward the areas that needed the investment. So while we prefer a statewide exemption because it's easy, you can do it county to county. Now, if you do it anything smaller than county to county, it gets almost impossible to administer, quite frankly.
I just
But,
wouldn't want the
yeah.
state exemption to be used in South Carolina by your investors who's not making decisions in Georgia.
Right, I mean, a lot of states already exempt it, so the problem is, like I said earlier, if you spend $1 million in South Carolina, I can build more homes in South Carolina than I can in Georgia with the same $1 million.
And if I could ask you, and I don't know the answer to this, is there anything that prohibits an agreement between local governments as it relates to SPLOST or tax allocation districts to help you offset any of those kind of questions you have locally? I don't know the SPLOST law that well. Do you know?
I mean, I think you'd run afoul of some of the statutory or the actual constitutional givings clause of the. I'm not sure. I don't think we've ever had a situation where that's occurred for us. So
You don't know if any of those kind of practices are used in other states?
I'm not aware of them. I only do Georgia, so I don't know what other states have done in that regard. But I'll be glad to do some research and get back to you on
And
that.
finally, as it relates to the feds, you referenced the FCC several times. Is there anything that prohibits our congressmen or senators on a federal level to, and this is an ugly word and I hate it, to use a federal or state earmark for the sole purposes of being able to provide the services in an underserved area?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And they
Well, we point, and the reason I ask that, we point to the federal regulations.
Right.
But we know they're passing legislation all the time that has this for this purpose.
Right.
Bridge
And
to nowhere.
USDA has funding for rural broadband development currently. There's hopes, at least from my standpoint, that there's a fellow up there now that's in charge of that might have a little sway for the state of Georgia. We'll just see.
And again, Mr. Chairman, my point is if we're using census blocks and half-central census blocks, and there's a big part of me that thinks that a federal earmark from a certain congressman for the purposes of doing that installation cost we referenced earlier is something that may not be tied to that, and I didn't know if that was the case or not.
No, and what I was referring to is Sonny Perdue now with he's over
Right.
USDA. One of the challenges I know that we've had in the past is some of the rules and regulations that USDA has, that if you spend dollars on a project or there are any other federal dollars being used for that project, then you can't use USDA funds, and that has brought to a screeching halt many projects in rural Georgia, because the way that they do that is building out collections of dollars from multiple sources. And so one of the things that we have pushed is that they loosen up on those regulations so that you can combine multiple sources of federal dollars to help implement some of these programs.
All right, we've got a lot of questions left, and so what I'm going to do is ask all of y'all to hang tight, and we've got a block of time between 11 and 11:45 for additional questions and discussion, and we'll come back to that. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Terry Hobbs, have a seat. All right, we're going to start. Let's go ahead. All right, we're going to, in the next section of the program, Blake is going to come talk to us a little bit about what he has found that other states are doing. And after his presentation, we'll bring everybody back up here and finish up our questions, and then we'll have whatever kind of discussion we're going to have as far as within the council, as far as where we go from here and what we're going to do next, and sort of talk about a little bit about the rest of the year. Blake?
Well, good morning, everyone. I was tasked with finding and highlighting some different broadband initiatives across the country. I tried to stick in the southeast region, but before we start, I want to show you that every other state in the nation is doing this. This is 53 pages worth of legislation just from this year that every state has done. Some have been enacted, most are carryovers. So getting started, the FCC, they technically do still define broadband as 25 megabits by 3 megabits. As Kevin Curtin and others have said, that may go down to 10 to 1. We'll just have to see. Georgia, however, they still define broadband as 200 kilobits per second. That's a 2006 law, and that's only 4 to 5 times faster than dial-up, so it's a little outdated. Just to give you a comparison, internet speeds at the Capitol in your office, they run about 60 megabits per second. And then just a little more information about the last mile. It's about $40,000 per mile if you're going to dig into the ground in the right-of-way for rugged areas for fiber cable. About $18,000 if you do it on power lines.
If you do it on what?
Power lines, aerial. These are FCC rankings. Like Eric already said, they're most likely skewed. The numbers are much higher, but it is still our best comparison state to state. And Georgia ranks 3rd overall in the nation, and third overall in the region, and 2nd overall in rural areas. And I do have that in paper format if anybody wants that at the end of the meeting. So there's about 930,000 people, according to the FCC, in the state that don't have access, but that's probably much, much more, like Eric said. 626,000 in rural areas, and they define rural as 2,500 people or less in a census block. Georgia's a little different. We define rural as a county of 35,000 people or less. We have 108 of those in the state. And then a little more information. Cities can provide broadband here in the state. Some states don't allow that. EMCs also can provide broadband in the state, but they're not technically authorized, so they're afraid of lawsuits. There's only a couple in the state that do provide broadband. So they would like to have that put into code if they are going to provide broadband. And then talking about the sales tax exemption, a 2013 industry study said there's about $33 million worth of sales tax from telecommunications equipment. Oops. That's for the state coffers, and then another $22 million on the local level. So jumping in to Chairman Jasper's question earlier, every school district in the state has 100 megabits per second access. So like the mayor said yesterday, the problem is students trying to do homework at home. They can't do technology-enhanced homework in rural areas. We paid for this $77 million in grants, another $129 million in E-rate funds, and they tied the last mile into the Georgia PeachNet network. And then we've also got a $4 million one-time program last year in fiscal year 2017 that handed out laptops, tablets, a lot of other stuff to 33 high-need rural school districts. Anyways, first initiative we're going to look at is Tennessee. In 2007, they used the same money that we used for the Broadband Center to create Connected Tennessee. That initiative, it's a subsidiary of Connected Nation. They essentially mapped out, just like our Broadband Center at Carl Vinson Institute, mapped out the infrastructure, and then they provided a place for different providers and cities to come together and strategize how to get spread out the infrastructure over the state. However, when that program, the grant money ran out in 2015, the state decided they didn't want to pay for it and figured they'd do something a little different. And that's when they enacted the Tennessee Broadband Accessibility Act this year. So that act, number one, it allows the EMCs to provide broadband, does provide a little extra protection for the other providers so they're not totally ran out of business. And it also provides a $45 million incentive program. The first one's a 6% tax credit on the purchase of qualified equipment. That's up to $5 million a year for the next 3 years. And then they also put a $10 million grant program for the next 3 years, so for a total of $30 million under the Economic and Community Development Department. That department does come up with the regulations and the qualifications, but they are giving priority to areas that don't have 10 megabits by 1 megabits per second broadband. Staying in Tennessee, Chattanooga is leading the nation and probably the world in municipal broadband. They have 1 gigabit speeds. They've had that since 2010. They're still enhancing their network. Their electric power board, or the city's municipal power company, they started building this network in 2007 when modernizing their grid. Most of that money came from, or half of that money came from federal stimulus, the other half, it came from bonds and other such things. And it's generated, on the low end, $865 million worth of economic impact, having that kind of speed. They've got Volkswagen's up there, I think Amazon's up there. Those types of speeds, they really attract high-power companies. And then Kentucky, 16% of their state, according to the FCC, is without access. They, in 2010, they told their Department of Local Government to start tracking the deployment and adoption. Just like Kevin said, adoption rates are low, so pretty much any plan has always been to educate as well as deploy broadband. And then that department, they also enable public-private partnerships. For some reason, some states don't allow that. And then they also make an annual report to the General Assembly, basically telling them what they found. More recently, the state has began building a middle mile project, which is essentially the interstate system that other providers can tie into. The state will own this middle mile project. It's called Kentucky Wired. It's going to cost somewhere near $300 to $330 million by the time they're finished, and provide speeds up to 100 megabits, starting at 100 megabits per second. Basically, providers can tie into this and build the last mile off of this, and they've basically expanded the PeachNet network in their state to cover everywhere. Their general counsel told me their biggest problem has been pole attachment agreements with cities and counties and EMCs and everyone else, because they don't want to compete with the state, so they're causing delays. Otherwise, they're expected to complete this project by 2018, and they will continue to own this, but they have contracted out with an Australian company to run the project. North Carolina is the best state in the Southeast for providing broadband, according to the FCC. They have some pending legislation, HB 639, which will appropriate $1.8 million over the next 2 years to the Department of Information Technology. That money will be given out equally to each of their regional councils of government, which are basically like our RDCs. And that money will be used not only to map, but to help strategize with local entities and providers about how to get to the next, how to complete the last mile. Older initiatives, which they're still using, are basically grant and loan programs. The first one in 2007 was through the Department of Commerce, and it was for economic development and infrastructure deployment, not only broadband, but sewer, gas, et cetera, et cetera. This other one in 2009, the Rural Economic Development Division, was administering grants and still is, and giving priority to the top-ranked tier system counties, just like we have in the DCA. And that's where they're at. They're still doing this, and it's been pretty successful. So Florida, as we know, it's not as rural as Georgia, but this bill has been highly controversial. The cities and counties are extremely against this bill that's awaiting the governor's signature because they're going to lose out on revenue. This bill is going to prevent any authority from regulating or charging for the access to the public right-of-way. It does exclude their state DOT right-of-ways, of course. But, so the governor's getting a lot of feedback on this one. We'll have to wait and see if it's going to be signed. And Arkansas, besides Mississippi, Arkansas is the worst state in our region. Mississippi ranks 51 out of 51, including DC. Arkansas is 46th. They decided in 2007 that they would create a broadband council to monitor other states' initiatives and advise the governor and General Assembly on what to do. They additionally decided in 2009 that they would give priority to all economic development grants and plans if they included broadband collaborations between cities and providers or counties and providers. And they also gave their high-cost fund, which is like our UAF. They also said it could be used for broadband for any provider, EMCs, charter, cable, AT&T, et cetera. In Oklahoma, this isn't a statewide initiative. It's just interesting. Oklahoma State University, they are copying a Kansas initiative by providing hotspots to local libraries so people that don't have internet access can go check them out, take them home, do homework, whatever they got to do. They cost about $200 a piece, but the problem is if the libraries like it, they'll have to pay for it after the 1 year's up. It has been fairly successful in Kansas. 60% of the libraries that were have continued this service. And then New York. New York has been the most successful program in the country. They've only got 2% of their citizens without access, and they just threw a whole bunch of money at it, basically. $500 million. They announced this in 2015. They used money from the merger of Time Warner and Charter Communications, and they're spreading the money out just like North Carolina through their RDCs. And they're also, it features a reverse auction process, so whichever bidder asks for the least amount of money is going to win the bid. And they also would like to have a public-private partnership in that RFP. So those are your two priorities in that. The goal is to make sure everyone has broadband by 2018, a minimum of 25 megabits per second in remote areas, and they're trying to stay ahead of the curve for future technology. They want 100 megabits pretty much everywhere else, and they've almost succeeded. The second phase ended in 2017, and that's what got them to 2%, and they're expected to be well under 1% when the third phase, which bids are due in June. Once that's finished, they expect to have the whole state covered. And that's what I got.
Well, that didn't take long. All right, at this point in time, since we are now ahead of schedule, I'm going to ask the panel of folks to come up and you stay up there too, so that we will just ask questions about everything that we've talked about this morning. Blake, I'll start off with a question for you. On the New York, which evidently seems to be further along in this process than anybody else and seems to have the most aggressive program, did they, some of the things I've read is that they sort of piggybacked in this reverse auction by using census tracts, very much like the Connect America program. Did they piggyback on that, or was it in competition with the Connect America program?
They piggybacked. I actually left that out. The third phase, the final phase, is actually using Connect America funds as well. So they're throwing more money at it with the CAF funds for bids that ask for less money.
All right, so do the Connect America, because from what some of the other presenters, I think Windstream had mentioned that they have taken advantage of the Connect America, and I think AT&T has too. So it's available to private entities. Did New York actually get some direct grants from the Connect America program that they then leveraged on their program? Or how did they do that?
I'll have to check into that. I'll have to get that to you later.
Okay, if you would, because it certainly do you know?
Mr. Tom McCabe is with TDS Southbound, who's sitting in the audience. He is actually participating in that New York program and can probably provide some insight into the program.
Right behind you. I'm right behind you. Why don't you come up here and join them?
I
don't want to do that.
The CAF dollars that New York has were provided from Verizon, decided that they did not want to accept any CAF money in New York, so they had no obligations to build out any broadband. So they were able to petition the FCC, and the FCC allowed them to take those monies and distribute it out into the other areas. Other states, all of the carriers that have requested those monies, for example, Windstream and AT&T, they're spending that money in Georgia, so there's nothing available for the state of Georgia to get that New York had.
All right, and I have a couple other questions, then I'll recognize other members. Stephen, you mentioned one time, I think a couple of times in your presentation about some of these different programs, and you made the statement, we were not invited to participate. Who is we and why not?
The cable industry is not permitted, is probably a better way to put it, to participate in either the CAF II program. We also do not receive money from the Universal Service Fund at the federal level or the Universal Access Fund at the state level.
This is cable that also provides broadband?
That is correct.
So even if I'm providing broadband, if I'm a cable company, I cannot participate in some of these programs?
That is correct.
Is that going to change? It seems like anybody that's willing to provide broadband that you would want to be included.
I'm not sure what's happening at the FCC relating to that in terms of whether cable would be invited in the future. For whatever reason, they chose to limit it to the traditional telephone company.
Okay. All right. Now, starting back with, I think I had maybe left off with Representative Shaw.
I think it was Chairman Reinders that was asking the question about basically how we could target any sales tax exemptions to ensure that they're being used to expand capability in the rural areas. And it makes me think about the Connect America Fund, and I think it was Ms. Willis that was talked about that you all had nothing to do with determining what areas those funds could be used in. How do they come up with those? Is that based on the percentage of underserved households or population? I mean, could we tie in and use that map? Is that the best map, in your opinion, to use to target the tax exemptions?
Their model that they use is a very complicated algorithm that takes into effect cost, number of customers. We provide them some data. It takes into account terrain and all of those things that would impact the economics of building out. And then it spits out categories of census blocks. So there are census blocks that they deemed eligible because of the cost factor that came out of their model. And then there were census blocks that they deemed too high cost and where it didn't make sense for them to invest money in those census blocks because the return wouldn't be there or the maximum number of customers wouldn't be benefit there. So that's that's a very basic understanding of the model. I do think it's probably not a bad starting point in terms because they have looked at census blocks across the state and across the country because we're a national provider also. We're participating in the CAF funding across our footprint in 18 states. So they take into account all of those things that impact our cost and ability to actually build, which makes sense in terms of what we're going to do. If we're going to look at funding areas, that would actually allow the state to then supplement and actually reach deeper into the rural areas and expand the network.
Okay.
Representative Shaw, real quickly, we would probably recommend not taking that approach, and for two reasons. One is it's poor tax policy, right? When you're taxing network equipment, you're taxing the input. And in fact, the CST recognized that when we had that debate a few years ago, because in that bill it was going to eliminate the sales tax on network equipment. So that's one reason to not limit it to specific counties or specific areas. The other is that there are plenty of areas considered urban. I think we had this discussion yesterday, didn't we, where somebody said, wait a minute, my county's on the map as urban, we're not urban. Well, if you use a model that if you use somebody else's standard for what's urban and rural, then you may have rural communities that are that are considered in an urban area, maybe because of a DMA or other factors, that then they don't have access to that program or they don't have access to that sales tax exemption. You can go to Fulton County and find areas that don't have broadband. South Fulton, for example, there are plenty of areas, plenty of hunting camps down there that don't have broadband, that sort of thing. Plenty of small, residential areas that don't have broadband as well. So if you limit it just to a county that meets a certain profile or a census block that meets a certain profile, honestly, you're just not going to have the impact that you want. Our recommendation would be just to do away with the sales tax on network equipment. And then you have more money to be put, can we guarantee that 100% of that money that theoretically the state would have gotten will get invested back into Georgia? No, we can't guarantee that, just like you can't guarantee that with any other sales tax exemption that's provided. However, I can guarantee that there will be more money available to the companies to invest in Georgia, and that Georgia as a state will be more attractive to put those dollars into. That's what we can't guarantee.
Just interrupting just a minute for a weather report from our ABEC president.
Yeah, we are a safety-conscious campus. When you've got 3,500 kids, you like to keep them safe. Many of you may have received a notice. We have just gone under a tornado watch, not a tornado warning. But if the situation were to become more perilous, an ABAC police officer will appear at the door. We do have a shelter in place accommodation in this building. It's go back into the main lobby and through the lobby by the gallery down into a hall. But should we go under a warning, an officer will appear and take you to a safer place if that happens. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, David. And we had talked about that up here and felt like that rather than adjourn early and put all of you out on the highway, that it was probably safer to be in here anyway. Stephen, just responding back to that last issue, wouldn't an alternative be, and I know that the industry would probably prefer that the sales tax go away, but to getting to Representative Shaw's point about trying to target these underserved areas, would it not be better rather than say, we trust you to do the right thing, which we do, but that rather than saying that we're going to do away with $33 million worth of sales tax, would it not be better for the state to take a policy and say, we are going to take that money that we collect on that sales tax and then target it to these underserved areas rather than just doing away with it?
That's a policy decision that you have the opportunity to make, Chairman.
I agree.
The industry is, but particularly the cable industry is in very different places with, because basically what you're asking is a state fund appropriate? And we've got some companies that are more ready to take that approach than others. We're still, as an industry, looking at that. And the reason is we know there have been some other states that have been held up as models where there's been successes. There's also been some other states where the money has been not used appropriately, where it's funded additional competition in areas that already have providers. We've seen some of that go on, which is good for no one in that case. So if you're going to do a fund, that there are some very tight controls, very tight restrictions that need to be put into place to make sure that the money goes to the areas, to the specific areas that need it the most.
Let me ask y'all to comment on, that several years ago there was a proposal that was floated around to do away with franchise fees, put in a communication service tax, so that whether we're talking about DOT taxation or franchise fees or some of these other things, and just make all providers pay a certain fee that could then go into a fund that we could, I guess, divvy out, whether we're talking about making the locals whole or whatever it may be. Would you comment on that just generically?
Certainly. We were supportive of that concept then and remain supportive of it now. Particularly with, for example, the DOT right-of-way issue, which has come up today. That right-of-way fee actually only gets paid by companies that are wholesale. They don't have an end user customer in that county or that sort of thing. So that's when they pay the DOT right-of-way fee. Is that not accurate? Okay, I'm sorry, Kevin. I was thinking of back to the issue this session. But you've got a lot of different technologies, a lot of different companies that are out there, some of which pay franchise fees, some services pay for, you've got services that a franchise fee gets paid on, and it's totally dependent on the technology that's used to get there. You can watch TV, and if you're watching on a cable system, you pay a 5% franchise fee. If you're watching an over-the-top product, so you're buying, so a Dish, for example, provides one. I think Direct provides now one as well. And they've got many of the same channels. So the customer looks exactly the same, but you don't pay a franchise fee for that. So there are some disparities there that need to be addressed, which is why we continue to support something like that, where it's not based on the technology, it's based on the service, and I think Kevin wants to comment.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on that. To a point, I agree. I think that anybody who uses the right-of-way, access to the right-of-way, should probably be taxed similarly. So if, cable's using the right-of-way, we're using the right-of-way, be it DOT, local, county, whatever. I think there's a system you can come up with that is similar to the CST, but it talks about in lieu of compensation. So basically, instead of paying a franchise fee, you pay essentially an excise tax that's in lieu of that compensation that's due today based on franchise fee system, because the franchise fee system's outdated, quite frankly. It was created in a time that is completely different than today, when you had monopoly providers, quite frankly. Back when we were a monopoly telephone provider, some of the cable companies were monopoly cable providers in their jurisdictions. Those times are no longer exist. So I think there's a possibility of doing something like that that is focused on right-of-way usage, you know, as opposed to just ubiquitous. Because, I mean, you know, speaking very frankly, DirecTV is one of our subsidiaries. They don't use the right-of-way, but they paid a lot of money to launch satellites into space and to buy the airwaves to be able to beam the signal into your house. So that's their right-of-way. They paid for it. It's just a different mechanism. So I think anybody who uses the right-of-way around the state probably should be treated similarly, and coming up with that model is challenging, but I think it can be done. Absolutely.
Representative Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was really taken aback by Blake's stats of $18,000 per mile fiber overhead, $40,000 per mile fiber underground. As a fiber producer, I must tell you that, man, that is high. Wrong fiber. But with those tremendous costs, it would appear that to address the problem of rural broadband access, those are prohibitively expensive. I know each of you have a different return on investment number. The cable, I mean, you were spending with the $3 billion for 1.6 million customers. That's $1,800 per customer. Windstream is a good bit less than $600 to $1,000 per customer. So each of you has that, but $18,000 per mile for the fiber overhead is in rural areas is just not feasible. And so it's a long way to come up with two questions. One, are any of you aware of the success that TVA has or have in their latest endeavor in wireless in Tennessee? And secondly, when we were talking about the fixed wireless, and one of the problems in expanding that network is getting permitting for 200-foot towers. And I must tell you, in this area, we have 200-foot towers and footprints all over South Georgia that use what Sam Watson, Representative Watson, mentioned with the guidance system for our tractors, and they're scattered throughout. And while I can get on a tractor outside of this building and use, and it's similar to the system. I know it's a different technology, but almost all of that is what I download and not what I upload. So the 10-to-1 is probably still appropriate there. I could use that technology outside of this building and in virtually any spot in South Georgia, but because of the network that we have, the backbone of these 200-foot towers all over. Is that a possibility in answering this question if a wired network is prohibitively expensive for the last mile in some of these areas? Is that something that we can look at?
Yes, I think the answer, I believe largely the answer to rural broadband is wireless, quite frankly. I think the economics on a wireless connection per user is much lower than a wired connection. That's why we've decided to use our CAF funds to deploy a fixed wireless internet network, because it's much more cost efficient in a less dense area. The number of people you can reach per dollar spent is much higher, in our opinion. And the nice thing about wireless too is, as technology evolves, you just have to swap out the antennas or the radio network versus having to run a new line to everybody. So it has some future proofing as well. As you get to higher and higher speeds on the wireless network, you can retrofit your network to accommodate those speeds. So we think in rural areas, wireless is a large part of the solution. Even especially with AirGig, our AirGig product that we're working on right now, if that pans out in our field trials, we think that's a tremendous solution because it uses existing infrastructure. You don't have to worry about 200-foot towers. You're simply running along power lines that exist today. So we think that's a tremendous opportunity if it pans out in our field trials.
Okay, Representative Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen, you mentioned the Universal Service Fund. Can you kind of educate me a little bit more on that fund and why is it limited to landline telephone companies?
So there's a federal universal service fund and there's a state universal access fund.
State access fund.
I'm not a good person to ask about the federal universal service fund because none of my companies receive from it.
Well, maybe just on the state side. On the state side.
With regard to the Federal Universal Service Fund, it's now transitioning, as I mentioned, to a broadband fund. We've accepted CAF dollars, and those CAF dollars that we receive are only in census blocks in which we are the only provider. We do not get any support for any customer, broadband customer, in which a cable provider operates in that market. So that's the reason why cable providers are not receiving money, because they would be, in all likelihood, in an area in which a telephone company exists already. The reasoning behind that was so that you don't have overbuilding of networks. You know, broadband is very, very expensive in rural areas. More people that are competing in a market area, the less likelihood that somebody's going to be able to succeed and get a return on their investment that way. So it's been limited to only those areas in which there's only one provider on that support.
I understand that. I guess what my concern is when I think about the constituents who's having to pay a phone bill for a landline that they really don't use, they just have it because they're required to have it for internet service. I'm just trying to figure out what can be done to help the constituent, and so that's why I was asking the question about the funding for the state. So
that's a little different than the funding issue.
Right.
I mean, it's a marketing issue. It's really what it comes down to is companies needing to recover a certain amount of revenue per customer. You know, and I think if you look back, if you were to start out with a new network, you wouldn't have a $10 phone line. I mean, internet became $20 because you were also getting $10 for phone service, you were getting others, different revenue sources. So the cost of the network is what's being paid for, whether it's, you know, broadband and a phone or just simply broadband. If you're not getting the phone, you're going to pay more for the broadband service.
Okay, thank you.
Representative McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of short questions. One is I'm glad Chairman England asked that question. He did. A gig where I come from, a sharp thing on the end of a long stick. When you take a notion, you eat frog legs. But to AT&T, I may be the only one sitting around here that don't have a whole lot of heartburn with right-of-way access fees. And I'll tell you why, because y'all have 2 fiber lines down the state route in front of my house, and you won't hook on any more customers, and I get that because you're full. Yet, when your contractors come by, they tat a right-of-way in people's yard that mow all the way to White Line up and put junction boxes in the god-awfulest places you could ever imagine to put one. And DOT has to deal with that when they mow the White Line. I mean, mow the right-of-way. That's why I don't have a whole lot of heartburn over access fees. The other question I had was one of your slides about 75 back, where you had, it was green and gray and something. Anyway, what popped into my mind was Elbert County, which is my county, is the only city up there in that part of the state that provides broadband. Yet that's where y'all are concentrating AT&T's broadband service at? Why are you necessarily in competition with a local city that's providing broadband to that county and not the surrounding counties where the local municipality don't reach?
I believe that map, if I'm not mistaken, was a map of the CAF eligibility, which we did not determine. That the green areas were the areas that the FCC determined were eligible for CAF funding, and the darker areas were areas that were already determined to have broadband. So those, I was just simply showing you a federal map. We did not create that map. That is not something we generated ourselves. That was something the federal government.
Well, why did the federal government decide that Elbert County, out of everybody in northeast Georgia, where there is a municipality that has a broadband service and is expanding, which 5 or 6 years ago AT&T didn't want them to expand, why did they pick that particular area when there's counties all the way around it that have no broadband service? And then,
I mean, if I could explain what the federal government does, you could spend all day. I really don't know how they determine that, other than that's the CAF eligibility areas. And we are subject to only building in those areas. That in that map, it was a green area. All the green areas are eligible. Now, I will say that just because you get the CAF money doesn't mean all those green areas are going to be built. I think our CAF money that we currently are funded for will reach about half of those green areas. So it's not everywhere there's a green area on that map will there be broadband built. It's generally half of those green areas. And we get to pick and choose within the green areas where we build it. And then there'll be future rounds of CAF eligibility and CAF funding. My understanding is that will continue to expand so that we get to 100% availability at some point in the future.
thank you, sir.
The birthday boy, Dominic Laricchia, has a question.
Well, first, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's ironic that here on the Rural Development Council, we're having a conversation about rural broadband access that's live streamed, and most of rural Georgia won't get to watch it because of limited access. But I guess this is sort of a challenge to the council and the stakeholders, the providers, to not get locked into this mindset that we must do something, because history would show that government doing nothing many times is better than feeling some pressure to do something. Our priority is to create an environment that will allow you to fight it out and figure out how to get service to these customers. And I'm going to use Connect America as an example. The Connect America Fund was broadly criticized because it was enhancing existing services and speeding up existing services, not getting to those areas of Oconee County that Representative Watson brought up. And I have heard 2 or 3 times using other states as the example of what this state government could do to incentivize investment by for-profit companies. Now, let me tell you what these bordering states can't do is boast about being the #1 state in the nation to do business for 4 years. That may be part of their issue, is in their haste to do something, they actually reduced businesses' ability to make profits and employ people and make investment. And so I'll just close with this question, and this is what I heard someone say at the podium, is that the economics just don't work, and that's what you told Representative Watson, that the economics in Oconee County just didn't work because of density, distance, and adoption. If the economics doesn't work for the private sector, explain to us how it works for the taxpayer.
You don't have to answer.
Thank you, Chairman.
Point taken. No, I will attempt to answer it. I think to a large extent you hit a nail on the head. how much can government do to modify how the private sector reacts? You know, there's only a certain range you can modify. I mean, you can't magically make everyone get broadband because of a bill in the General Assembly. This largely has to do with economics and physics. I mean, when you get down to it, you know, a signal running across a wire is physics, and you can't change that. It is what it is, and technology will advance, and it will get faster over time, but that's nothing government can do anything about. And economics, you can only play around the margins, you know, taxation, things like that, and maybe subsidization. But the fundamentals, I think, will be advanced generally through the advance of technology. We'll take care of a lot of these issues. A good example of that would be this airgate project we're working on. That would fundamentally change the economics of broadband. And that's a technological leap forward. Even the fixed wireless internet product we're rolling out right now in parts of Morgan County, in parts of Oconee County, et cetera, areas that can't be reached by economically through a wired solution, those are solutions that didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago because technology has advanced. So I think to a large part, technology will take care of a lot of these problems. Now, will we have the patience to wait for technology to solve them is a large part of the question I think that the council will struggle with. But to your point, I think you're largely on point.
Kevin, let me ask you a question since you got the mic. The technology that you've discussed, is it strictly proprietary to AT&T, or is it something that I could buy off the shelf if I were a competitor?
It is proprietary to us because we have about 200 patents on it. We spent about 20 years developing it. Not to say we won't license it, like we licensed the telephone originally. I mean, that was our proprietary technology back in the 1870s. We licensed that to other people from Alexander Graham Bell. But if it were to work for us, I'm sure that's something that we wouldn't try to ubiquitously provide everywhere. I'm sure that would be something we would license to other providers to use that technology.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes, sir. Representative Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were during the break, we were talking about this, and maybe our surveyor who did the survey can answer this. How do we rate pricing-wise, especially rural Georgia, metro area, across the state, across other southern states? I think, I know we rate everything these days. I'm sure there's one out there. I was just curious, pricing-wise, for broadband.
We did not, in our survey, we did not have a question about price, because everybody would always answer the same way. I want it cheaper. And so we were more looking at access. Do you have access to it? I'm not sure how we break from price, but my guess is it's pretty uniform, because we're talking about national providers, we're talking about local providers, and they're looking at cost recovery models and such. My guess is it's pretty much so uniform all over the place, and there are different things that play into that help drive up the cost. Sometimes there's things that help drive down the cost, but for the most part, I would think it's pretty uniform across the country. And I think that's one thing I just haven't really seen a whole lot of. I know that I have family out in Montana, and they pay a god-awful amount for internet, but once again, the cost to deliver it out there is a lot more.
Thank you.
Representative Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to go back to one thing. We were talking about right-of-ways and pole costs, and I forgot to ask earlier. Y'all all mentioned pole costs. Is that something that's, y'all not negotiate that at all, or is they just say, this is what it costs, if you wanna get online, this is what it is, so take it or leave it, or is there any kind of negotiation there?
So for, in particular with the EMCs, the cable industry, I'm speaking just for cable, has a negotiated rate that we negotiated with the EMCs on a statewide basis about 9-10 years ago. That was the result of a bill that was introduced because the rates were being taken from, in some cases, $8 or $12 a pole to some wanted $24, $26 a pole. So legislation was introduced, it never passed, but it helped to get, it helped to bring both sides to the table to negotiate an agreement. Fast forward 3 years, about 6 or 7 of the cooperatives had actually signed the agreement with cable companies, and so there was another round of legislation to enforce the agreement at the state level. We're about into year 10. We're almost to year 10 of those initially signed agreements. But so yes, there's a negotiated rate that is out there for our industry, but it is but the 10-year anniversary is coming on us pretty quick, and we, to my knowledge, have not had any discussions over what happens after that.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I got one more follow-up, please. I'm not picking, I want to pick on Windstream, but I'm on Windstream and have excellent service. So you're just the lucky one. I picked out some numbers here, and I was just curious if I know I'm probably out of the ballpark on this, but under the federal funding part, you had, in your slide up there, you said there was $25 million invested, from the rural utility service, and Windstream had about $8.6 million invested to hook up 8,000 locations. In my math, that's $1,075 per location that it costs Windstream. Is that somewhat of a fair statement? Because that's a pretty, I think that would be a pretty quick return on your investment if that's all it costs you.
Well, and I can't say that that's all it cost us. I mean, that's how much we invested,
Right.
and certainly that was supplemented. And when we think about investment, federal versus what we have done privately, our private investment is 10 to 1 more than what we've received in terms of subsidies or help from the federal government. So while we invested that much for that particular project, that doesn't necessarily, in my mind, mean that that's how much it costs to serve those customers in totality. That's how much we invested for that project. Now, is that how much it costs totally to deliver service to each of those 8,000 locations? Probably not. That's just what we invested in that project to enhance the service for those locations. Keeping in mind, we already have network that we've already spent dollars on, and this was to enhance that. And then there's also the maintenance cost that Stephen mentioned that goes along with that. So that's how much we invested in that project, not necessarily how much it costs to serve those customers.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to get back to a couple points. One was what Representative LaRicchia was talking about. I kind of, listening to everybody here and what we're looking at as the rural communities, we're almost back in 1930 when there was no electricity. You cannot have development in rural communities until you have that infrastructure there. So it may be the point where the government does need to assist back when we needed electricity. So it's a similar process, I would think. I don't mean that we need to go in and start a whole new program, but it's going to need financial assistance to get it done. And as we look at that, we've talked about getting it into the homes, which is vitally important. But how is that going to help us for an economic impact? I want homes to have it, and that's important, and everybody wants their computers and their kids to have it, but we need to make sure there is return so that those rural communities will now have the ability to have businesses that need it. I know, again, my small business couldn't function without it. I'm in a community that does provide it. And I don't see how we can ever help the rural communities if we don't find a way to do it, and if it means as a government entity, we need to look at our resources.
Well, keep in mind, I think probably President Bridges put it as succinctly as possible yesterday, which is you can't just solve one problem. You've got to solve all the problems, because you cannot have telemedicine unless you have the broadband connection. You can't have the education that you would like to have, and I agree with President Bridges that we all were educated under a different system, but if the schools are going to say you've got to do your homework online and you've got to access your books online, then you've got to have broadband service, and we don't need to be doing that at Starbucks or at
We don't have Starbucks.
or Burger King. In my community, I heard some parents last week talking about that after school every day, their children went to Burger King so that they could access broadband and do their homework. And so, that is, you got to have the broadband in order to do those things. You can't attract businesses unless they can get broadband access. You can't have businesses unless you've got a workforce that's ready to be employed. So it's education, it is people, it is tax structure, it is infrastructure, it is all of that, this is one component that we're looking at. We know that we need it. We know that it has to be there if rural Georgia is to survive. So, but this is the first of about 9 or 10 meetings that we're going to have talking about all of these different, whether it's economic development, whether it's workforce preparedness, whether it's education. So we're going to listen to all of those things over the next several months. And then we're going to not tackle one of them. We will, in some way or another, decide on a plan to tackle all of them, because one of them is not going to solve any problems.
That's right. Thank you.
Other questions for the presenters? If not, thank you all very much, all of you.
Well, all righty then. My co-chair put the microphone in front of me. Thank everybody for being here. Again, thank you to our presenters, and especially thank you, Dr. Bridges and Scott and the ABAC team, for all of your help. I think we have gotten a little bit to think about over the next few weeks, over the next several months, actually. Just some wrap up real quick. The presentations and the video from this meeting today will be archived on the website that Brent has created for our council. So all of that, if you need to go back and look at any of the presentations from yesterday or today, or think about it 3 weeks from now, want to go back and look at something, it will be there and accessible to you. If you have at least 1 megabit download speed or something, I guess it might work on dial-up, I'm not sure. But anyway, or go to Burger King. Our next meeting will be June 15th and 16th in Toccoa. So please make plans accordingly for that. We will be getting you details out on that ASAP as far as lodging and those sorts of things as well. I hope everybody has felt that what we've done, what we've talked about yesterday and today have been helpful in understanding some of the problems and some of the situations that we're going to be dealing with a little bit better. And as my co-chair just mentioned a few minutes ago, there's no one single bullet. Dr. Bridges mentioned that yesterday. There's no way to do one thing that fixes everything, and piecemeal is not the way to go about it. So we hope to be very comprehensive, and you'll see on the screen the website. Just go to the General Assembly page and click through, and you can get there to get the information, and you'll see the presentations down there in the middle of the page. So anyway, if there is no further business, we just hope everybody has a safe trip back home. Be mindful of the weather, please, as you travel. And for those of us that like to run 80 and 85, might want to slow down about 70 or 75 or a little slower, as the roads will be wet. And don't endanger yourself and others, and our public safety personnel as well. So thank you all, and Godspeed, and be careful going back home.